Test. Alright, well folks, sorry to be late here. Let's see, let me make sure that we are indeed live. Test. Hey, look at that. Alright, well folks, sorry to be late. Kick ass. Alright. Let's see, let me make sure that we are indeed live. Alright. Got some lights to connect here. Give me 1 second. How about a change of scenery? There we go. Now let me get a spotlight on this, and then we can get started. Ugh. Not enough space for damn TV crew in here. Alright, almost there. Oh, shoot. Ta-da! Awesome. Let us get started. Got a paper. Got a pencil. Don't go away, Mr. Pencil. Got some kind of an eraser. Alright. What? Oh, crap. I unplugged my monitor. God dang it. How did I manage that? Technical difficulties. Okay, is that it? Are we on? I'm waiting for... Okay. Whew! Alright, now we're ready to get started. Alright, let's see. Hello, Ash. Thanks for bearing through the technical difficulties. So is everything fine for everybody? Why isn't it live? Go live. Go live, jerk. There. Okay, we're on. Whew! Alright. So, let us switch gears here. Alright, on the desktop. Namely, we want to, let's see, prepare for this major assignment that all the linear perspective stuff has been working up to. Let me show you some examples of it. Let's see, we want that one, and that one, no, not these. And that one, and that one, and that one, and that one. Alright, open those. Let's do a little slideshow. Alright, now notice how there's 2 photographs glued or taped to this drawing. Let me close the doors here, so there's not the incessant chirping in the background. Alright, so those came before the drawing, these 2 printouts here. And the object of the assignment was to plot out the linear perspective of these photos, like following the lines of the buildings. We'll talk about that in greater detail. And to fill in a scene around the photos. And for some people, I said, if it makes it easier to come up with something in between, use two photos and make up the context in between. But that's not necessary. Some people like to go fanciful or imaginary with this. This is your universe. The biggest difference between these examples and what you're going to be drawing is that we're not using the printout or the photograph. That requires a printer at least, which I don't have a printer. Do you have a printer? So we're going to simply just come up with a landscape with architecture in it, or the interior of some kind of architecture. The big necessary catch that you need is the architecture. It can include elements of landscape if you wish. It could be an exterior. It can be an interior, as long as it has some kind of perspective in it. And I'll show you how to conjure up a drawing from scratch using linear perspective in a moment. I can't see my chat. Let me see. Any questions? All good? Good. All right. So in this case, the photograph was just a coffee shop or something. And so she extended the photograph pretty faithfully, and she populated it with animal characters. Notice how there's space or an environment beyond the windows here. Even that has to incorporate the same horizon line as the photo, and the objects in it need to obey the same linear perspective. Notice one fairly consistent thing about these is that the light is being addressed. And we'll talk about how to incorporate light into your perspective drawings in a moment. But in the very basic sense of a light key, you need to have a consistent direction for all your light planes. Notice all the light planes in these objects is on our left side. All the shadow planes are on our right side. That means the sun, or the light source in this scene, is coming from the left. And that stays consistent on all of these objects. So there is going to be a great deal of imagination involved in these drawings. But the catch is, the requirement is for you to build an architectural environment using linear perspective. I believe in this case we're looking at a one-point perspective drawing. If we follow this edge here, again, we'll go over in greater detail how to reverse engineer a perspective if you're trying to figure out your photos. One thing I want for you to do, just like the landscape we just did, I want you to find references for everything that you draw. I don't want you to be making up anything in the scene. It's going to come out kind of lame, kind of basic. It's going to look contrived. So if we'll talk more about how to reference photos, but let's keep looking at examples here. So went totally imaginative, even with the light key. But notice in the kind of nighttime scene, I don't know, the light sources around the tree seem to be, casting the shadows. We'll talk more about that in a moment. All right, and finally, I believe this is the last one. I love this example. This guy went all out. Notice he is drawing kind of a poppy, kind of a cartoony style with contour lines, but he makes sure to address his terminators. So the perspective of the architecture has to be correct, or linearly, perspectively correct, and the light key needs to be correct. The perspective of the light needs to be correct. Again, I'm going to go into that, the perspective of light, in a moment, actually right now. But if you don't want to have to do the trigonometry I'm about to show you to figure out your light source, don't incorporate your light source in the picture. If this perspective of light business is just too much at once for you, by all means skip ahead past the perspective of light bit and just simply don't incorporate light sources within the picture itself. Just tell yourself, my light's coming from the right, or my light's coming from the left, or is it coming from, maybe straight down. I think it's easier to have a sideways notion. That way you have a better idea of how to shape your terminators. But notice, even though this little girl is drawn out of contour lines, this terminator is creating volume. See, her shoulder feels round because the terminator is round. And it feels like the skirt here is casting a shadow onto the legs, so that creates space and depth there. So be like this guy. This guy really went nuts with his scene. Now again, we're not beginning with the photo. I would only recommend this if you have a printer and maybe you're having a little trouble getting started. This might be a good approach to reverse engineer the perspective of a photo you like and just kind of imagine the space beyond the photo. But look at that. He even went so far as to create an underground shopping mall. Yeah, that's fun. All right, so perspective of light. Let's talk about that. Now, I'm mostly telling you this for posterity, for you to go back to later, but I've also included, let's see, in our D2L, you'll find that the first news item right at the top of our class, let me get into our class, is the perspective of light Word document that maps all this out, what I'm about to be presenting to you. We're going to be looking at a slideshow, but if you want the Word document version, you can download it from our D2L site. All right, just as space can be plotted out with straight lines radiating out from a common vanishing point on the horizon, you can plot light in the same way, because really that's the whole reason linear perspective is a thing, because of the way light radiates out. So if you're building a three-dimensional scene with linear perspective already, you are then able to figure out how lights and shadows should behave. Notice how plotting straight lines directly out from the light source and kind of skimming over the edge of these objects, that line then points at the same point in the shadow, right? It's true of the computer, it's true of the tripod here, it's true of the tape. So all of the light coming from the spotlight is coming out at perfectly straight paths, straight angles. So you can incorporate that into your linear perspective drawings. Here we don't have much linear perspective, we just have the horizon because I wanted to isolate what's going on with the light source. But all of this light source stuff happens after you work out your linear perspective. But what's going on here, and this is the case when you are using a heavenly body as your light source, so that's pretty much the sun, or if you're doing a nighttime scene with a full moon in it, you could have actual moon shadows being cast. But anytime your light source is in the sky, you drop a plumb line straight down to the horizon, because these objects are at a pretty much an infinite distance away as far as our focus goes. Their ground points are plotted directly down on the horizon. So those are the parts that make this perspective of light. You need two vanishing points as opposed to space, which only minimalistically needs one vanishing point. You need the light point in the middle of your light source, and you need the ground point that is immediately beneath that light point on the surface you want to cast your shadows on. So let's all begin with the cast shadow, and then we'll talk about the Terminator. So we use the ground point to draw a receding ground line and plotting the shadow from the object we want to cast a shadow from. So you see, as wide as the feet stand, you can plot ground lines to show how that shadow is going to radiate out and get bigger as it advances towards us. Now, you figure out the length of your shadow by the same means. You see the ground point is sort of measuring the width of the feet and how that width would fan out. The light point, or the light line from the light point, would show you how tall the object is by, skimming the top of it. Now that can be done within, or that can be done with light sources inside of your space instead of, heavenly bodies, if we drop our ground point immediately beneath the light source itself. So here you see the vague linear perspective lines. This is just, well, this is actually a two-point perspective space. So that was all established first. And then we begin with the ground point and see how the receding ground lines kind of conform around the edges of our object. And then we use the light point in the center of that light source to kind of triangulate the length of the shadow, right? So you can see how this part would be, might be too much to handle if you were struggling with linear perspective. Don't bother with this light perspective stuff. Just tell me if your light's coming from the left side or the right side. All right. Now, really tricky. So Advanced level number 3 is if you want your shadows to change angles. So again, remember these ground lines are corresponding with the surface that you want the light and the cast shadows to be projected upon. This is sort of a two-dimensional projection in a three-dimensional space. So whenever these ground lines hit the wall, we can just take a 90-degree angle straight up to sort of show us where these corresponding points would be in our space. For instance, if we were to try and, wow, okay, this is very tough to try and explain. Okay, remember it's all about the apex of the triangle where the ground point and the light point intersect. So that's what's showing me where the head should be. You see these lines radiating from the head, they're coming from this light point here, right? And so wherever they intersect with a ground line that's heading up this wall, that would show you how the lady's head would project on it. Don't ask me why she's not watching TV. She's watching a blank TV. Oh, and advanced level number 4 is intersecting shadows or multiple light sources in the same space. So they're each going to cast their own shadow. You see the shape of the cup here is a shadow that's coming from this light source, and the shape of the cup there is a shadow coming from that light source, and of course where they intersect, the shadow is going to be half as lit as the two shadows that are also lit by the opposite light source. And for bonus advanced points, the light sources also affect one another. Okay. So, and these are just kind of some inspirational examples of kind of thematic or conceptual ways to use light in a realistic space. You could use light to place a focus on a thing or a person. Now, remember, these are value drawings, so this Rembrandt is a good example of how having a balance between your light values, right, and your dark values. This is almost quartered up how much real estate he gives to the light values and how much real estate he's giving to the dark values. But this is overall a dark, heavy picture. But it does have balance, and he's actually balancing those values against one another. So your composition isn't just the objects in your space and where you've laid them out. It's also about where you're placing your lights and where you're placing your darks. Those have to be balanced. All right, more fun. You can kind of almost see how that light perspective stuff would apply here. And you can also use your light source or choose an object in your scene to actually radiate light itself to add some focus to it. Here's a good example of that. He's not actually creating the light, but notice how the value is creating a focal point on him, because you know that's the lightest values in the scene. All right, now getting back to our assignment, I want you to actually research any object you want to include. So let me pull up. Let's see, where's that picture of the Taj Mahal I had? Is it in my downloads? Perhaps. There we go. Taj Mahal. So let's say I wanted to put the Taj Mahal in my scene. Well, you want to look up pictures of the Taj Mahal. You don't want to just try and draw it from memory. So I'm going to place this on the screen, and then I'm going to switch to demo mode. Hopefully I haven't talked out my battery. But let's play a little bit with this and see if we can actually do some linear perspective. Oh, I'm going to turn my light back on. I believe I'm focused. That's pretty good. Alright, let me get my chair. Now, I'm going to draw the Taj Mahal from a two-point perspective angle. So, let's say that's my horizon. Maybe we can zoom in a bit. All right. Now, I'm going to be drawing the boundaries of my composition on the page to make sure that's fitting in the screen. So just whoops, you see that's not fitting. Yeah. But imagine that these are the extreme edges of your page. So I showed you how to kind of set up a few things in one point perspective with that lame train station example, but let me show you how to create something in two-point perspective. So first we see that water feature. That's a good kind of ground-based, flattish shape we could start with. So you see now how I've changed the axis of my space to where the photo we're starting out with right here is clearly a one-point perspective scene. And if I wanted to plot out where that vanishing point is, I would follow the tops of those trees, I would follow the edges of that water feature, and wherever the lines would meet on the horizon, that would be your vanishing point for the whole scene. But I'm converting this into two. Now let's say I want to cut off that water feature right about here. So that edge would come from my other vanishing point. Now some things you can start to freehand in here once you get the basic setup in. I want this to be a fun drawing for you, but also remember it's a value drawing. It's not just an outline drawing. So what I'm showing you is just the linear perspective stuff. Okay, well, that's what it looks like. Let's move on. All right. Now let's actually do the palace. Let's make it about this wide across the ground. See, that line would come from that vanishing point, and then this side, this wall would come from there. Let's draw the height of the wall. Now, proportionately, the wall is actually pretty small, even though we see people on top of it as tiny little ants. So that was pretty basic. Now there's a little section sticking out from here. So I think from this example, that's way too wide. Let's fix it right now while we can. And then some verticals here. See, this is where you can start to kind of eyeball it. So my marks are just kind of pointing at the vanishing point. Oh, dang it. Draw much more carefully than me. I'm doing a speed job here. All right, let's draw a box right about here for kind of the main body of the space. So there's this big rectangle in the front, so then I would use verticals from there Remember, in a two-point perspective drawing, you get three types of angles. You get vertical, but then the other two are both receding edges coming from these vanishing points. All right, so then inside that, I can kind of plot out the smaller bits. Now remember, as things recede, they're getting narrower as well. So this would be more narrow than that side. And then inside that, we could use our Xing out technique to find where the peak of that arch would be. Let's see, it would begin here. Kind of, sort of. This is a rush job. Okay. So this is something we could measure out, right? Where the shoulders of this intersects the X should be on a receding axis. So that helps us kind of adjust the perspective on that. So that would go in. Shut up, computer. All right, now there's another part with polygons on the side. Let's simplify those to be more boxy, just for the sake of time. I can show you how. I'm just worried about my battery dying on me, timing out. Okay, now this would be an opportunity to figure out what kind of perspective your ellipses should be. Now you should only have to do this a couple of times to kind of feel out the progression of these ellipses and be able to kind of fake it on your own. But around here, around this tower, an ellipse would be sort of that wide. But we're actually looking up at it, so we wouldn't see all that. Let's just change that to a concave line. And then remember, those ellipses are going to be getting more and more narrow as you go, until it's almost a straight line on here. Okay, now check your proportions. Notice this tower is way too tall, because that would mean this tower is about that tall. So let's instead start with the tower on this side, because that will help me. Let's see, we already have this plane kind of plotted out, so that would be kind of a shape, kind of like that. Okay, so let's do that elliptical trick again. Notice that I'm aiming at my vanishing points as I'm jotting those in. So I see that an ellipse should be about that round on that high of an axis. So then that's where I would put the lip of that tower, and then all the rest of that good stuff. Okay. So now I'm able to plot out how tall the corresponding tower here should be. You see, I was way off. So I guess since the large one is more of a focal point, or more closer to the edge of the picture, I should probably base my linear perspective off of it. So that'll show me how tall the tower would be on this side, not that tall, and if it had sections right there and there, I could also plot those out as rough guidelines as to, let's say it's about that deep, how the tower on this side would work out. same case here. Let's get rid of that. Also, my width would shrink proportionately as well, the way I worked out that one. Okay, about that tall, and that tall, and that tall, and that tall. Alright, so it's basically almost like connecting the dots at this point. Just draw your forms. Well, that would be a lot more narrow. Where the important landmarks we just plotted out would take place on these axes here. Alright. So let's see if we can do those or what would those be? Hexagonal sides. Let's build them onto a cube. In other words, the square part in the middle we'll just consider a cube for now. Let's say it's about that deep. So about right there. And let's see, maybe we can fake the other side. But those octagonal walls, or hexagonal walls, let's begin them as boxes that we attach to the side of this box. So about that tall. Let's see there. Seems like those forms, yeah, that seems like they're equally as tall as the front bit. I've never been to the Taj Mahal, can you tell? So, just eyeballing it from the photo. Alright, so the box we built here, we would want to plot that flat shape of the hexagon onto. And also these planes, kind of like we did with the 9-box problem. So from here, we get a plane shaped like that. So let's X that out in order to find the midpoint on this side, because really, let's see, so a line radiating out from that vanishing point and running through the middle of the X, right, from here straight through the X and meeting this point here, that would be the extreme end of that hexagon. But let's just let's divide this side in half using the same X. So that's a point that would be right here. So let's make that point connect with that point, and vice versa on the opposite side. Now I'm drawing pretty dark so you can see it, but all this drafting work would be as light as possible. Okay, so that would be about there. So that would be the angle of it down there. And of course we wouldn't see that side. So now we can lose all of this kind of scaffolding around it, even the stuff inside. And so we can clean that up, and let's say we're going to go with the same sort of light key as the photo. Let's see, so this wall would be catching a little bit more shadow than that wall. So the whole thing could be darker until you get to those arches, kind of like right there. Oh, those are pointed arches. See, this is what I mean. After you set up the basic geometry of these, or of the walls, you can sort of, let's see, guesstimate and eyeball stuff. So the whole wall itself would be kind of in shadow. Let's just simplify the light key and say the the flat part of the wall is in shadow. Well, where do these... Okay, so you have these shadows, these diagonal shadows. I guess that would mean, don't want to plow over my tower here. So that would mean maybe the light's also breaking right there. Whoops. Yeah, you're a big help, Mr. Eraser. So while I'm occupied doing this, I'm not able to check the chat. So I'll address any questions you have as I can. So the light on this wall would be much brighter. See, that line would be heading towards our vanishing point there. Okay, and let's create a shadow right there. It's really the shadows that are going to give your space depth. The shape of those terminators, right? Just the angle of this one is showing you with the relative angle of the sun. Ah, dang it. Alright, sketching. This is just a sketch. So remember, everything I'm doing in this demo is just preliminary drafting work. You do need to turn this completely into a value drawing. Now, speaking of materials, this is going to be a graphite drawing using your full pack. So all of this sketching stuff you'd want to do with your 4H pencil, let's say. And then as you're getting more committed to the values, you can start graduating down that value scale. And I want to be honest with you, you could probably get most of the value drawing done with your darkest B grade pencil. Because graphite is a very light medium, and remember when you back away from it, it kind of fades on you. If the majority of the drawing is done with like an 8B or a 9B pencil, that's fine, but you may find that to be a bit much in the really light areas, especially if you're pulling off a atmospheric perspective illusion. Now, following the light key of the photo is all well and good for the first thing that I'm drawing, but I'm going to want to make sure that all my lights are basically coming from that angle on every single other object I include. So again, your space is going to be whatever you want it to be, as long as it has some kind of architecture in it. So let's see, let's plot out the plane of the roof here. What that might be like. So maybe about that shape. So we want to center the dome right about here. So that's going to help our illusion of it being set back from... Wait. Okay, I'm getting confused. Oh, that's a stray vanishing point line. So, you know, that's why you don't want to draw the full extension of every single receding edge you start with. Because then you start to get these odd... Oh, well, that is the side of my plane, isn't it? Oh, I'm just a big dummy. I guess it's that stuff there. So clean up as you go with your kneaded eraser. So this is the center. I want the drum to be equally as far away from that point as possible. So then, let's see, if an ellipse would be shaped like that there, it'd be even wider up here. And then domes are round. we do want the axis of the dome to be on the same middle axis as this plane. So we'd want the tip of it to be right there. Okay. Alright, so I guess the only thing that would be left would be these octagonal bits on the side, which we can, we don't need to completely go over that. So, let's see. Let's see. So, if this is the light key, where the light's kind of coming in from the right here, so that's how we would fill in the rest of the space, even the parts that we can't really see from the photo. Right, so the left side of this would be even darker than that plane, because that plane's kind of facing the foreground a bit. Right? So, just for consistency's sake, pick a direction for your light to be coming in at on the edge of the picture. Let's see, so if that's there, the picture's telling me that the shadow on the dome would begin there. That means the shadow of this would be here. Alright, let's see. Now, let's do a quick perspective of light demonstration. Now, that's a lamppost because people are tiny. Alright, now let's say there's just a random box right here. Let's see. Let's make a cylinder, like kind of behind that light source. One thing I want to point out about the perspective of light, we've already noticed with our observational drawing this semester that cast shadows extend out from where the terminator on your object is. So if the object is touching the surface or the table where the shadow is being cast, let's see, so the light point would be here. Oh, we want to make this shorter or else the shadow would just extend forever. So let's put that right here instead. Alright, so the light or the shadow would kind of extend out in this direction here. We don't know how long yet until we use the light point. So this line is skimming the bottom right about there, so I want to kind of skim the top right about up here. So that will intersect with the ground line roughly at this point there. So the shadow would be about that long. Now, if this were the only light source in the entire scene, then maybe we might notice the shadow out this far. But when you have multiple lights and when it's outside and when it's not realistic that the light would project out that far, simply drawing kind of an ellipse around your light source might give you an idea of how the light should dim as it goes away from you. But the point I wanted to make is, look where this ground line is skimming the front and touching it. It's showing you exactly where the terminator should be. And then of course that would all be dark. Let's do that with horizontal marks. Alright. And then it would be darker kind of around the ellipse we showed you there earlier. But we're not possibly going to be able to get into all that. Notice how close the shadow comes to the light source. That's a good excuse to kind of create a halo around my light source. So it feels like maybe there's some air in the space. Quiet stomach. All right, so let's see if we got any questions. All right, no questions, eh? Well, so get started on this. Don't hesitate to send me questions or text me questions, because you can also send me images of how your drawing is coming along, and we can shop your drawings. So Tuesday, we're going to use as lab time to work on this assignment, so we have, about a week of time to work on it, and the critique on this drawing will be a week from today, next Thursday. So don't hesitate to ask me questions or keep me posted of your progress if you want my advice and guidance. Alrighty. So I'm going to terminate the lecture here. Unless there's a quick question on the board, I don't see it. Alright, I'm going to click it. Okay, bye-bye, people.